You may not know it, but my career owes a lot to Ed Hillary. In 1972, I had just graduated in medicine, and I spent 3 months in the Khumbu with Ed, undertaking research and understanding the real problems that come from a lack of iodine in the environment, leading to these terrible problems with very large thyroid glands and in 15% of the population, severe mental retardation. It determined that I'd have a career in medical research rather than in clinical medicine, and this is just a photo of Ed, one of the few photos I actually have of Ed, taken at the Kumjun school, the school which was mentioned that he was the first one he opened in the Khumbu, and this was taken in November 1972. The organisers have given me an impossible task. As you know, I wear several hats. As President of the International Science Council, which is the world's principal NGO interacting between the science community and the multilateral policy community, I have to deal with lots of issues around between the relationship between evidence and policy and this raft of existential risks that we need to think about that range obviously from pandemics and climate change, which was talked about by the last speaker, through to the issues that worry me particularly, the issues of social cohesion, because humans are social animals, and if we cannot live with each other, we cannot thrive. Obviously, the issues of how we coexist with technologies, and I'll talk about that in a minute, and potentially we're seeing the end of the Westphalian system by which the rules-based order which determined how nation states behaved is under real risk. And as I've already mentioned, we're living in a time when science is being questioned for political and short-term interests more than it has been for decades. While it's most obvious in right-wing populist politics, as we're seeing in the United States with willful ignorance of climate change and its consequences, and the continued misstatements about vaccination being used as badges of political identity, we're not immune here when we reject the genetic sciences on one hand or fluoridization of the water supply on the other. Even in New Zealand, I worry about the obvious decline in the structured use of evidence in policy making when new technologies such as AI and the life sciences technology have so much to offer. The next part of the Science Advisory Panel report, which will be in 3 or 4 months' time, will focus very much on the issues of how we improve the use of evidence in policy making. And as has been mentioned, I direct the Centre for Informed Futures, incubated in the University of Auckland, but fully autonomous and independent from next year, which focuses on long-term issues affecting New Zealand's future. It's strictly non-partisan. It focuses on stakeholder engagement, actionable knowledge that can turn into policy and community action. We're very careful to be non-partisan in what we do. And we have 4 major domains of thinking about humans, how we will flourish into the future, how our societies will flourish into the future, and in particular the future of technology, of democracy, and living with change, social change, demographic change, technological change, environmental change, geostrategic change. And we do that in a way that tries to make and change the nature of the conversation. All our focus is on long-term issues, not on the short-term transactional issues of the political debate of today and tomorrow. Because that's New Zealand's disease, and I'll come back to that in a moment. The third hat I wear is I lead the panel, which is reviewing the science innovation system on one hand, and a second panel reviewing the state of the university system on the other hand. And both these are partial reports. There's a second stage to the science report to come out in a few months' time, and the first stage of the university report should be released very quickly. I'll try to bring these three perspectives, the international, COI 2, and the science report together in my remarks. I think you've already all know about the marshmallow test. When you put a marshmallow in front of the kids and say, if you not eat it immediately and wait, you'll get 2 marshmallows instead of 1 marshmallow. Well, if New Zealand was a child, we would fail that test absolutely. The exception would be some of our iwi. But in general, as a society, we think so short-term compared to other societies, it's very worrying. And we have a political and societal culture that's built around short-termism. She'll be right. We always fix it with number 8 fencing wire. We have a short political cycle, one of the shortest in the world, 3 years. We have a shallow democratic system, only one layer of government with a very strong executive, small cabinets, weak select committees, a lack of think tanks, which are an important part of a democratic process, and a relative lack of willingness across the whole of society, both in politics and amongst ourselves, to look at the really deep underlying issues. Unless we're going to look prepared to have civil discussions that look at the long-term issues, we'll fail as a society, because short-termism and short-term interests tend always to weigh against the long term, as the former Prime Minister of Kiribati just pointed out. Short-term interests are delaying and interfering with dealing with climate change. But I could say that about so many other things, and I could say it particularly about our economic system. We've ended up in a situation where we tend not to want to deal with the realities of complexity, and we keep on searching for magic bullets when they don't exist. And all the discussion is driven almost entirely by the political apparatus rather than by civil society. New Zealand has one of the lowest trusts in the media of any OECD country. The default position of New Zealanders, more than 50%, distrust the institutions rather than trust them. That's very different to 30 years ago, and suggests that the system that we have now is not going to serve our long-term needs well. Even our most sensitive and critical discussion, what it means to be a multicultural and liberal democracy based on bicultural historical underpinnings, has been turned into a political circus at both extremes, rather something that must be driven by a slowly emerging national consensus over time. And in the current context, it would be difficult to start that discussion without it being immediately hijacked for political purposes. This is something that's a real worry to me. So let me quickly just say a little bit about some of the things that I worry about. First of all, about our own flourishing. The quality of our education system is not something we can be proud of. And yet, as Ed pointed out and knew in Kunjong, don't know how many decades ago, education and quality education is at the heart of national development. Our education system is not in good shape, and we tend again to look at short-term issues rather than asking the deeper question. What are the skills a kid born today needs to have to thrive, because they will live, he or she, into the 22nd century, and the world will be very different, and the skill set that kids need, particularly their emotional resilience, will be key to the future. A lot of our work in Keynote is about the state of youth mental health. 20 to 25% of young people conservatively have enough concerns in their mental well-being to interfere with the choices they make at that most critical time in their lives, when they choose to be a mountain climber or whether they choose to be a doctor or a scientist, the relationships they form, whether they, etc., etc., etc. We again simplistically reduce it to just thinking about social media, when the issues in our society that have led to this and the state of our educational system are so much more concerning. And all of that will determine whether our future is a healthy, thriving future or whether it's not. And we can't separate the reality that every society is made of individuals. And if we don't think about how the next generations of individuals will develop, we will not have a healthy society. Much of our work, and where we're probably most globally well known, is through our work on social cohesion, societal resilience. And there we need to think in terms of how we get on with each other. We do not, no democracy requires that everybody should group think. No democracy requires that we all should all think the same. But we should be able to work and find solutions which both respect the interests of the minority as much as they respect the interests of the majority. And most of all, any large-scale society like New Zealand needs to have trust in our institutions. And I think we can all think of the multiple ways in which that trust has been squandered in recent decades. I would suggest to you that and I would refer you particularly to the last report on the right there, addressing the challenges to social cohesion, to the issues that New Zealand must confront if we're going to have a country which is cohesive. Because if you think about it, as a small country, distant from the bulk of the world, if we have not got a stable, cohesive society, we will not be relevant in the way that we would want to be to the rest of the world. The third theme we work on, I'm not going to dwell on now, is informing policy. But there again, I come back to the point, policies need to be evidence-informed rather than politics driving what evidence is convenient. And here I think there's a lot to do. A lot of the work I do internationally is on the potential for AI to become a way of synthesizing evidence much better to present to policymakers. And of course, what we're all worried about and what we've been talking about here is navigating this remarkable set of changes that are all coming on us at once, and they can be looked at through an optimistic lens or they can be looked at through a pessimistic lens. Either way, we work in many of these areas, and the area that was perhaps of most relevance to what this session is meant to be about is going to be about technological change. Technological change is on us at a pace and in a way it's never been before, and it will determine the future whether we like it or not. AI and its offspring will be the way knowledge is generated, knowledge is synthesized, how it's used and how it's misused. And on the right, you'll see a report which Keynote wrote, but was adopted globally by the International Science Council as a framework for thinking about how AI and other rapidly advancing technologies should be managed. Biotechnology, the life sciences are changing dramatically. The new technologies of CRISPR and other things and synthetic biology change the future for both the humans and the environment and what we do. New Zealand is a biological economy. We're already well behind the 8 ball from any other economy, well behind the 8 ball on the use of these technologies. And the new bill coming into the house, which was brought into the House just before Christmas, is a chance to change that. But already I'm scared that misinformation and disinformation may impede the ability to use these technologies to deal with issues like climate change, methane reduction, predator eradication, and so forth. And now we come to the guts of what I think I was meant to talk about. New Zealand's low productivity and low growth. This is the reality. I use Denmark as the comparator because in 1970 we had the same GDP per capita. We both had an identical reliance on agriculture as a source in our economy, and look at the difference now. New Zealand it's not just a short-term issue of the last government or of COVID. There's been a progressive change, and New Zealand's exceptionalism versus even Australia and the OECD, and certainly the small advanced economies like Denmark, is very obvious that it's now 3 to 4 to 5 decades old. We need to think about that. We blame it on, it's because of the lack of long-term thinking of what really drives economic growth. We blame it, we can put all the short-term issues on the political economy or on the fact that there's too many road cones in Auckland slowing down the traffic. But there's deeper issues under play here. The deeper issue is we've not invested well for the future. And at the heart of that, beyond education, is our commitment to knowledge. This is the reality. This is, on the right-hand column, is the investment per person made in knowledge by both the public and private sector in New Zealand using 2023 or 2024 numbers. You can see that you can talk about GDP and percent GDPs and all of that, but at the end it comes down to the hard dollars in comparative purchasing terms. So the difference between the second and the third column is one is the raw dollars per capita, the other is adjusted for purchasing power. Either way you look at it, New Zealand sits out rock bottom. Okay, Latvia does worse than we do, but they've not only been a free democracy for a few years. We've been there for more than 100 years. But look at it. If you look at the other small advanced economies, and this is non-defence expenditure in the case of Israel, Switzerland, Austria, Finland, Denmark, Singapore, Norway, they're all 3 to 4 times higher than us per person in investing in knowledge and innovation. And that's the guts of the issue. The Denmark thing, if you go back and calculate the difference in investment made between Denmark and New Zealand in R&D, between 1980 and 2000, the difference was 64 billion New Zealand dollars. I haven't calculated it since then because I don't see the point. And then if you do other analyses, and I won't bore you with the details, you can see quite clearly across the world that there is a relationship between GDP and investment in R&D. And if you look in more detail in the bottom right-hand panel, you can see that the public expenditure needs to get to about 0.8% GDP before you can expect the private sector to rise in response. There's many reasons for that. And if you look in more detail, and this is a little bit old, this data now, but this is data when I was Chief Science Advisor, at the other small advanced economies, you can see that it's about 0.8% GDP before private sector growth takes off. What do we spend from the public? Well, optimistically, with a little bit of fiddling by MB on the numbers, we spend about 0.55 to 0.6. The private sector is spending about 0.6 to 0.7%. Again, you just go back to the realities of the investment spend. We're just way down, and yet the challenge is because science and innovation don't make an immediate return. It needs long-term thinking. Even Peter Beck, it was 10 years from when he first went to MB and Callaghan to rockets really start, and he's now starting to make lots of money, and good on him. I made discoveries that led to a company which is worth many billions of dollars on the stock exchange in Australia. I don't have shares in it now, I want to declare. But it took 20 years from the discovery before the FDA approved the drugs that gave it value. That's the reality. If you look at our economy, which is built on sheep and cows, the Treasury-owned data showed there was a 20% annualised return on investment in agricultural research between 1970 and 1990. Why do we continue with this exceptionalism to believe that we can be rich if we don't invest in education and we don't invest in knowledge generation? This is the heart of the challenge for New Zealand, that we cannot get beyond long-term thinking and realising we have to make some decisions now to make a return which will benefit us into the future. And it's hard, I know that, because of the political dynamics. I've already mentioned that, so I won't go into it now. So we made some report, in our interim report, and I emphasise it's only an interim report, we made some recommendations. And I'm actually very proud. The number of them that were agreed to by the government is really important. The Prime Minister's Science, Technology, Innovation Advisory Council agreed. Redressing the shape of the CRIs, agreed. Addressing the barriers between the universities, CRIs and the private sector, agreed, although more work is needed. Rethinking start-up and scale-up, that's where I'm working at the moment. Invest New Zealand, agreed. Address the advanced technology gaps, agreed. Nothing about money though, and nothing about investment yet. We're doing more work, and our second report will come out sometime in the middle of this year on these issues. But at the end of the day, the start is being made for the first time in 35 years on rethinking the positioning of science and technology in New Zealand. And it will be politically difficult because it must span both sides of the house, and it must accept that it will take time to get the return. We have no problem in investing in fibre and roads and bridges as hard infrastructure. Let's think about knowledge and innovation and education as soft infrastructure and invest in the same ways. One specific component that we're thinking hard about is our needs in advanced technology. New Zealand will never be technologically sovereign. We'll always rely on partnerships with other countries, and we need to be strategic. We need our universities not to compete, but to collaborate. We can't have 8 universities each pretending they're going to be great at AI or life sciences or whatever. There's 5 million people, half the size of Paris. We need to work together. Harvard University has just put out, I think, for 160 professors in AI. We're not going to compete against that. We need to think differently and strategically. We need public-private partnerships. We need international partnerships. We need to think about AI. Where have we got a unique selling point? There are unique selling points. We can think about applications within government. A small island state which has got good systems like we do may be able to find out things that other countries cannot. Our borders are easier to define. There are applications in the private sector. In medtech, we're already strong. In agri-tech, where we could be strong. We're never going to be sovereign in quantum. We need partnerships with countries that have supercomputers at a different scale. Synthetic biology and biotechnology, I've mentioned. So there's all things we need to do, but they all need public investment and then private investment and a system that's more joined up than what we have. I was at a meeting in Auckland the other day, I'm not sure Pam Ford's in the room, where we actually had a discussion about why Auckland is not showing the productivity gains we would expect in other primate cities in other countries like Copenhagen or Helsinki or so forth. It's because we're not joined up. The universities are here, businesses here, big businesses there, small businesses there, etc., etc. We're one of the least joined up, even though we're all in one city, we're not well joined up to actually find ways to do things better. We don't have an Auckland one-stop shop for innovation that many other countries have. So I'm going to stop there because there's a big light saying 0.00, and I better shut up because I'm on a rant. But seriously, long-term thinking is hard. We all evolved, humans evolved with short-term thinking. At best, until even when agriculture developed, we were only thinking in 1 or 2 seasons in advance. Now the issues in front of us require us to think 10, 20, 100, 200 years in advance. I remember, and some people do that. I remember, he's sadly dead now, Manukau Hanari, who was a professor at the University of Auckland. We were thinking through how about work that needed to be done about New Zealand's future. And I had 0 to 50 years on the x-axis, and we were thinking through what could be done. Manukau came up to me quietly with it, took the felt pen off me and put a 0 after the 50. The axis had to be 500 years. Now, that may be a bit ambitious, but the point he's making is we need to think intergenerationally, and we need to invest in people and in systems that will allow this country to do so. I've mentioned that I don't think our structures are right for doing so, and the political 3-year cycle with a very intense MMP-driven tail-wagging the dog system is not designed for long-term thinking. How we do it requires think tanks and others to work together. The Hillary Trust, the Hillary Foundation is great. As I said, I started life with Ed, not life, but my research career with Ed. He understood what it was all about. We need to plan. We need to plan ahead strategically. It's not just where you put the python on the rock face, and I wouldn't have a clue how to do that anyhow, but it's about how you plan, how you want to change a society. He built schools, he built hospitals, he thought about the future of the people that had given him a remarkable start in life. Thank you very much.